Welcome to Consider Yourself Hugged, a place to find comfort and support as you navigate your mental and emotional well-being. So sit back and relax, unless you're driving, and get ready for this week's hug.
Exciting. I'm super excited. We have exciting ideas, y'all.
I'm excited too. So I think we just like transition right into, we're excited. And y'all know we talk for sometimes 5 minutes, sometimes 30 minutes before we hit the record button. We don't want to record some of the things that we talk about, but we are going to talk about the book Chatter today, which I think Michelle and I probably processed in two way different ways because of our, just our backgrounds and the way our minds work. But before we did that, we just at least wanted to not refresh, but I don't know, debrief a little bit more on the retreat that we took. I don't know if y'all watched, if you listened to the last episode, or if you looked at our pictures, or I put the video in there, right, in the show notes of the sliding, glass door. So
Oh, I
you
don't
didn't
know
know?
that I didn't realize it was a video. I did see it, but I didn't realize that you put
I
the
think
video of us.
maybe I didn't. You think was it a picture? I meant to put the video in there. Maybe I put the picture. Well, in any case, you sometimes when you do something, you get really inspired, and then it just sort of, I don't know, goes away. Um, this isn't. Like, this is not going to go away. So, just so you all know, we have a plan in place, and let's see, what should we reveal? Which parts do you think?
Well, first, I think we should reveal that it's our idea could be life-changing, and we're super excited to share it with people.
That's true. That's a good reveal. And there's two separate things. So we'll just let you know for now. One of them involves AI in ways that you wouldn't think about. And the other one involves the retreats, which we mentioned. And I think we're going to do a little mini practice retreat with some young women coming up in the next few months. And by practice, I don't mean we're going to like practice on them, but I mean, we're going to just take the flow of what happened in our retreat and try to help some of these like women in their 30s. That just are looking for some direction in their life. So I think we're going to do that maybe in April, and then we're really going to start planning. What do people want? What will the cost be? So would you all be willing to go on a retreat with us? I'm assuming you're saying yes. So let us know in the show notes.
Absolutely, and we would love to know like particular um, interests and so forth, because we um, just are so excited about it, and we want it to be something that um, everyone enjoys as much as we did.
Yeah, we have some different things that we want to incorporate that won't be things that you will have done before. So I guess that's enough for now, right?
I think so.
Yeah. And this is our last book, which I'm sad about, but now do remember you and I talked about doing a book club, like a live book club together, so we can't let that go.
Yes, yeah, definitely doing that.
So for you all listening or watching, we really encourage you to try to figure out a way to do that, because it's bonding with each other, it's processing things, it's learning new stuff, it's hearing new perspectives, and it's just been fun.
It's a good way to do community, for sure.
Yes, do community. All right, well, let's talk about Chatter. One thing, so Michelle and I both love Audible. So we both listened to it. I listened to it, it's been months ago, but I also got the Kindle because I wanted to be able to bookmark things. And I must have stopped reading like at the very, very, like when the last chapter stopped, I just stopped because I had already listened to it. But I pulled my Kindle out today, and as I was scrolling through, I clicked on like the back, the table of contents. There's book study questions in there.
Really?
Yes. So we'll look through those before we sign off today, and I'll put them in the show notes, because I think it mentions things that you really will have to have read in order to answer the question. And we told you all you didn't necessarily have to read all these books to like get something good out of it. So there's that. So I thought what I would do is just kind of introduce the book as far as what it's about. So I just wanted to read the description, mention like the flow and the key takeaways that we're going to talk about. And then I actually want to hear what you thought overall first. Is that okay?
Okay. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. So let me read just the basic. If you all haven't read the description at all, I'm going to read that for you. So in Chatter, psychologist Ethan Kross explores the inner voice that runs through our minds, or what we call self-talk. While this internal dialogue can be beneficial for problem solving and motivation, it often turns into negative, ruminative chatter. So that when he talks about chatter, he means it in a negative way that fuels anxiety, self-doubt, and stress. So this book blends psychology, neuroscience, and real-world examples to explain why this happens and how we can harness our inner voice for good rather than letting it control us. And so the book goes through, I think there's only like 4 major sections. So there's the introduction that just kind of guides you through why the book matters. And then there's a whole section on what chatter is, and then how chatter affects us. And my favorite thing about this book is that I think I talked about this one day on like a Facebook Live or something, was that it didn't just say, okay, here's what self-talk is, here's what chatter is, um, here's the science behind it, and there you go. He has 12 very specific techniques, and most of them, probably all of them, I've actually tried. And so that's the rundown. And then just the themes and takeaways that we'll talk about at some point is the power and the pitfalls of self-talk. So if we all have self-talk, we'll give you, I think, some very interesting statistics. Did you think the State of the Union thing was interesting, Michelle?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
So the power that we're going to talk to ourselves. So how is it great and how is it not? And then the second thing are some internal techniques to manage chatter, external ways to manage chatter, talking a little bit about what Michelle said, finding community and social connections, and then also the fact that you can use your environment to help quiet chatter. And that's kind of, I don't know that Michelle processes it this way, but we've talked many times about creating at least our internal environment in our office to give us a sense of peace. So that's the overview. And Michelle just finished it recently, much more recently than me. So what was your overall take?
So I really enjoyed it, and I think that that it's a lot of information. I will say that if you haven't read it completely yet and you're reading it, I do think that probably taking a little time and processing each section could be really helpful. And so we were doing it for today, so like I listened to it on Audible. I listened to it throughout the course of a week. Not a very long book. It was 5 hours and 40 something minutes, I believe. So, not a huge amount of time compared to some of the other things we have looked at and read. But I do think that like taking a little more time after each section to process it is a lot of information, a lot of really good information. I think that some of the key points that really stood out to me was noticing the difference between chatter, positive self-talk, thoughts, and so forth. Like he does a really good job explaining what he means by chatter and how it can be destructive. And so, like, I'm not, again, like, there are parts of the book that I really agreed with strongly. There are parts that I wasn't probably as on board with that we're going to talk about, but still overall, like a lot of wonderful, great tools that he gave to kind of quiet that chatter, the spiral, and so forth. And so, I mean, we've talked before, kind of like in terms of backgrounds. So, like anxiety type chatter isn't necessarily something that has been a struggle for me, but I can say that when it came to negative self talk, negative self worth, definitely at times in my life, the chatter had been negative. And so kind of the concept, and he mentions this in the book as well, the concept of talking to yourself, comforting yourself the way you would a friend is powerful,
Mhm.
because I definitely know times in my life when I was younger that the way I talked to myself was way harsher than I would have ever spoken
Talk to somebody
to
else.
anyone else. Yeah, very, very harsh. So just to kind of get it started, that's my overview in terms of like my impression of the book. I have definite things that I think are great tools and takeaways. I have a few things that I probably processed a little bit different. So I don't know, do you want me to talk about that,
Yeah.
or do you want to give your overall impression first?
Well, actually, I'll give my overall impression, and I think it's very noteworthy here. Well, a couple of things. So you listened to it, and it's interesting that you said that maybe taking more time to process. I think that's why I got the Kindle, which I haven't done for any of the other books. Now, I did it for Ritual, which is a book we won't do, but I really loved, and I listened to that mainly because I teach a lot of people about like teamwork, and Ritual was a really good, interesting book. But I guess I hadn't thought about it till you said it. I needed to have the actual book to highlight some things and
Mhm.
make some notes. So I can see because what you're seeing right here, if you're watching on YouTube, you're seeing it, but I have so many notes. And a lot of it was me talking. So I'm listening on my walk and I'm talking into my phone. And then eventually I got the Kindle so I could copy paste. So that's one thing. Another interesting thing is everybody knows Michelle and I are different, a little bit of polar opposites in many ways. And I am I either love something completely or I hate it. I mean, and Jamie does
Mhm.
that too. My son, Jamie and I have talked about that. He'll meet somebody and he'll either think they're awesome or they're horrible. And then he learns later that no, there's a blend of those two things. So I can't think of anything that I didn't like or now there were some of the tools that I definitely thought were more like, oh, this is new to me kind of thing versus some of the other ones. So my overall impression, and Michelle and I talked about this and she mentioned it before we jumped on. Again, it doesn't occur to me that everybody doesn't spiral out all the time. I forget that, or I just don't think about it. And it's very easy for me to spiral. So we'll give some examples, but this has helped me a lot. And I'll give one specific example in just a little bit. But for Michelle, who, depression is where she battles more and anxiety is where I battle more. So I'm spiraling more than she is. So yeah, that's my overall impression. I loved it. All right.
And
Now,
it was good. It definitely good. So like the one thing that I'll say, like in talking, like as you're reading or as you're listening to the book, I will say that I think that the more time is helpful, because it is still, he's a psychologist and it is a psychology book. So the entire time you're hearing about thoughts, analyzing thoughts. He does give some examples and stories, but it's still about thoughts. And so you have to kind of stay engaged to that. So it's not what I would consider necessarily like an easy light reading, if that makes sense. So you have to analyze what he's saying because he's very analytical in the way he's saying it. And so kind of that kind of goes into the taking a little bit more time to process like each section. But I will say that like the first part of the book, when he is describing how they did research on different people and what their chatter was like, he asked different people like around a city to kind of take him through like what their chatter was like over a period of time. That was super interesting. And like to tap
did he ask them what their chatter was or what their self-talk was?
Well, he asked them what their self-talk was, and
Yeah.
what he found. That's a very good point. He asked them what their self-talk was, and what he found was quite a bit of chatter involved in their
The
self-talk.
right.
And like connection he makes between like how someone feels depending on where their chatter goes or
Hmm.
where their self-talk goes and so forth. And um like the tools he gives at the end, he gives several different tools at the end, which is a really helpful thing to kind of have those practical tools at
Yeah,
the end.
that's so
But
true.
he is talking about like controlling emotion and a lot of the different things, like how your chatter, how controlling chatter can help control the emotions that are attached to it, which I think like is kind of the key. We even talked like throughout the course of the week. It's kind of the key of cognitive behavioral therapy, right? Like the
You
whole
mentioned that.
cognitive behavioral triad of how we think affects how we feel, which affects how we act, and kind of both ways. I think that kind of while I was listening to the book, and he does make mention of this, he does make mention of the fact that this is just that he's not talking about chatter in a clinical way, really. He's talking about just, what we do every day. And so I think that, in some, because from a clinical perspective, I'm jumping, to like depression, anxiety and so forth. And like the fact that clinically there can definitely be feelings that are overwhelming that do not appear to be related to thoughts.
Mm.
And so
So
that was kind of one of, yeah.
that's a little criticism that you had, that you didn't think that was made clear enough for people who are reading it. Because, and we've talked about this a lot, clinical versus, but go ahead.
Well, I think he does make mention
Hmm.
of it, that it's not like he's not talking about like depression from a clinical sense, anxiety from a clinical sense. But I do think like there was a little bit more of the sentiment that if you can just control this chatter, that, these other things will substantially decrease, go away. You're going to be able to control your emotions. And I don't necessarily think it's that
That easy.
straightforward. But I do think many of the things he said, many of the tools he gave can definitely decrease like the negative self-talk, the anxiety producing chatter. Um, the only other thing too that was a little like the distancing, I
Hmm.
think that sometimes that can be, he talks about a tool called distancing, where
Distance.
you are trying to distance yourself from the situation, distance yourself from the emotions so that you can handle it logically. Because, sometimes our emotions can cloud things and the decisions we make. We know the logical answer, but we choose the emotional answer.
Right.
And so he talks about that. He talks about using distance, like even like referring to yourself in the third person.
We know how Tammy feels about that, but
Yes, yes.
he doesn't.
We know how Michelle feels about that as well.
But it
I
is,
think that,
there's a Harvard research study that backs, well, we've talked about it before, that backs up talking to yourself that way.
and I think the trick really is, and this would be other thing because he doesn't really mention it. I think the trick really is knowing when that's a helpful
Hmm.
tool for you and when it's not. I think that sometimes, like, I do think that dissociating from our feelings and what's going on around us is a concern right now in the world. I think that phones, that like a lot of times, oh, I'm comfortable in this situation, I'm gonna scroll, and things like that can be something that is a struggle right now for people.
Hmm.
So I think that like there are certain times when whatever the emotion is, recognizing it, co- soo- choosing like a self-soothing technique versus distancing can be more helpful.
Hmm. Because I didn't, this is so interesting for us to have this conversation, because we had like different, I mean, I know you said you liked the book, but did you think, like, I took distancing self-talk, not distancing yourself from your emotions, but just talking to yourself, as I thought that was very similar to like, imagine advising a friend, or um, kind of fly on the wall approach, that you were just trying to talk to yourself in a way that made it more logical and less emotion based.
Which I think, yeah, that I definitely perceived it that way as well. I think the only thing what I was saying is there are certain times when the emotion is helpful to feel, process, and let go of, heal from. And then there are certain times when it's not. And so knowing the difference
Gotcha.
between those two things, I can remember doing that, like the grief recovery course. And, it talks a lot about how one of the difficulties we run into with grief is trying to shut it down, or like
Okay.
pain is shut it down, and like we find different ways as humans to do that. Oh, you fell and skinned your knee, here's a cookie. And so like
Is that bad?
different tools we use, apparently, yes, yes. Okay. And so like the only thing that I would say, and again, this is a deep book. It's kind of like, and even talking about it feels deep because there's a
Like,
lot of theory in this
I know,
book.
I'm still going to ask you another question, but go ahead.
Um, and so like I think that knowing, and I'll give the example of, my mother's birthday was January 29th. My mother passed away in 2014. Um, we had but when she died, like we were best friends. And so like I had some dreams last week and I was just really missing my mom yesterday.
I didn't
And
know.
so, yeah, and so like I just took the time to remember her, think through it, kind of have some comforting self-talk, talk to a family member about it, and feel better, versus like choosing a distancing technique.
I get it. I get it. I guess, I think for me, coming from someone who spirals not as bad as I used to, which I want to share an example in a minute, but just like what you said about grief, I guess the way, so when he talks about chatter, like we all have self-talk. Um, but let me define chatter for you all. Okay. The cyclical negative thoughts and emotions that make introspection harmful. So instead of tapping into our inner coach, we found our inner critic, jeopardizing performance, decision making, relationships, happiness, and health. So I don't, and I think you're so right. This is so much like theory, and it's not supposed to be therapy for anybody. It's for you to use it however it works for you. So I don't, when I think of grief, I don't think about cyclical negative self talk that's
Well,
hurting.
and you make a very good point. I think that like I'm definitely going to respond to the book better because I don't really feel like I don't think I have much of that.
Yeah. Of the cyclical stuff.
Yeah, so I think that like I'm like trying to
I,
apply it
you
to
know,
things that
you know how
apply
much
to
I
me.
hate, you know how much I hate you right now? Like, isn't it terrible that I'm jealous of your particular set of symptoms of your mental health struggle?
We'll have to talk about that one day because it's hard too. Like and that's kind
No,
of like
I know, I know, I
yeah,
know. Yeah.
where I came from the perspective of like, clinical depression is a feeling when you wake up in the morning at times that like there's no thinking yourself out of it. I mean, you can think yourself into doing different things, but it's not like shutting down chatter is going to get rid of that.
Yeah. It's a
So
different thing.
it is a different thing. So I think that like it's something where I'm trying like to apply it to things that, and it just, yeah, yeah.
And I had no idea. Like we've talked about this before, but what did I ask you, Michelle? Oh, I asked you that day, like that I was worrying, and then I forgot what I was worrying about. And then I said, you know how when you do that, she's like, no, what are you talking about? But then when she or people with depression talk about those mornings when sometimes it's all you can do to just get up and function, and I'm like, no. So
Yeah, yeah.
it's so different. Um, but let me give, to me, other than the mental hospital time, this is one of the most serious like chatter spirals I've had, and it's been almost 10 years ago. I think I've shared it before, but I want to compare it to something that happened recently. For those of you who do deal with some of these spirals, because remember, it's negative and cyclical. So, you know what? Let's back up for a second. We really need, I don't think we clarified very well the difference between that and just self-talk. Because how many times do you all, we've done it too, look at your water and you start thinking about water, and maybe your bottle's pink, and then you're like, Valentine's Day is coming up. What am I going to get? I need to go to Walmart. I need to get soap. And your mind just like, and at the same time, you're having a conversation with someone. Or the example he uses of the way our minds work is you can go sit, or one of the examples, you can sit in a restaurant and be looking at the menu. Your friends are talking. You can keep up with what they're saying while looking at the menu and then ordering, and still maybe thinking about you need to call your babysitter and check on your kids. And that's what our brains do, and it's what is it that we call that? Um, I
Being a
can't.
woman, it's hard.
Yeah, I guess. But
Multitasking.
multi, but some of us, like in this, he makes the point that in the 21st century that we've been told that we need to be mindful and meditate, which everybody thinks, or many people think, your mind is just supposed to be blank. And he references a book that I have read that I love. I don't know if you've read it, Jill Bolt Taylor's A Stroke of Insight. And she is a neuroscientist, and she had a stroke. But because she was a neuroscientist, she was able to like experience it and think about it. And the stroke was in the left side of her brain, and she lost a lot of that self talk. And she talks about how for a while it was lovely. There was no critical voice. It was like, but then after a while it got scary and she healed. But our minds are designed to be able to do things. And do you have the statistic? I have so many notes here. I've got it somewhere about how quickly we talk to ourselves.
No.
Okay, here it is. Hang on, y'all. Okay, so he actually refers to what I just said as our default state. He says that so humans were not made to hold fast to the present at all times. We are able to mentally go forward, go backwards. And he said, according to his research, we spend 1/3 to 1/2 of our waking life not in the present. And he refers to it as our default state. It's the activity our brain automatically reverts to when we're not engaged. Like you and I are talking right now, so I'm not thinking about a million other things. But we slip back and forth. Okay, so then he says, all right, so we talk to ourselves inside our heads at the rate of about 4,000 words per minute if we were doing it out loud. So let me just read this, because he says, to put this in perspective, consider that contemporary American president's State of the Union speeches normally run around 6,000 words and last over an hour. Our brains pack nearly that same verbiage in 60 seconds. So that means if we're awake for 16 hours on a given day, as most of us are, our inner voice is active about half of that time. So we can theoretically be treated to about 320 State of the Union addresses each day because the voice in our head is so fast. What do you think about that?
Um,
It depends on if you've been to Starbucks or not.
so
You're like,
I'm trying, like, again, like it's going to take more processing because, I just finished the book. And so the book really needs some time to reflect and see, okay, do I feel like that is true for me? Because I think everyone would be like, that's, I don't do that. But at the same time, we don't notice. I mean, we're not aware of it. So,
right.
I mean, so I can't necessarily say, because I know like that I do have a lot of like internal self-talk, 320 State of the Union addresses worth.
Depends on what
Hard to
president. We're not going to
say.
go there, but
Yeah. I mean, I guess it does depend on what's going on. And like you have to like, I listen a lot. That's kind of my job. I listen a whole lot throughout the course of the day. So, yeah.
this is so freaking interesting. I wasn't thinking about the difference. Were you thinking about the difference in the way that we would process the book because of how our minds work? I just didn't think about it.
I think when I started the book, I kind of like originally thought, I think that this is an incredibly powerful book, and it's an incredibly powerful book with with amazing tools to stop chatter if there is a struggle with chatter.
Well, it's funny, two things. I thought you were going to say if chatter is your struggle bus. And he actually says that if we didn't have the ability to do the multiple memory movement that we do, our brains would have to be like the size of a bus. But the second thing is maybe we should do one more book, and we don't have to do it next week. But I think I would love for you to find a book that maybe relates to something that's more depression related. And I think
It's
that,
more of a struggle now for me. Because like I said, I do think that negative self-talk, like when I was younger, like when in my like 20s and maybe early 30s,
mhm,
I definitely think I was really unkind to myself. I'm just not now.
which is a good thing.
Yes, yes,
But
very much so. But
would you
yes,
like,
and yes, I will find a book that has more. Yeah,
okay. And there's so much that we have highlighted here to talk about, but I think a lot of it isn't necessarily um well, one thing Michelle mentioned earlier a little bit, but I want to refer back to it, is one of the studies that he references that what participants, aka me, you, are thinking about is a better predictor of your happiness than what you're actually doing. So maybe you're celebrating a birthday, you're at a party. So what you're doing, and maybe you're the one being celebrated, and it's such a happy occasion. But if you're ruminating about something that happened, that is a more predictor of how you're feeling than the event where you are.
it's
And
definitely true. Yeah,
yeah, I thought that was a really powerful thing. And he does go back and talk about how we learn there's this thing called the phonological loop. As I'm talking about this, and I heard you talk about that it wasn't really an easy book to listen to, but I didn't experience it that way. And so I'm glad that you are bringing that up because for me, it was, and I know you related it to CBT, to cognitive behavioral therapy, but it's been a while since I've been in that kind of therapy. And I was reading it as oh my gosh, this is me. Oh my gosh, this is me. And so we were just reading it in different ways, but I didn't think it was hard to read at all. I wanted to tell Tim, he said this and he said this and he said this. So it's interesting to hear that if it's not necessarily your struggle in the moment, it might be a little bit, less easy to read. So, all right, should we move on to
yes,
okay. So just the quick story and the comparison, and then we'll walk you through some of the tips, maybe not every single one of them, but 2015, I was doing a mentoring series for Social Security. Now, 2015, so it had been almost 10 years since the bad panic attacks, the psych hospital stay, the Klonopin that I needed every so often because my panic was so bad. So it'd been a long time, but I definitely still had self-talk struggles. So they hire me to script this series for mentors and then a series for mentees. So my job was to create 10 like 20-minute scripts for each group, and we had to go back and forth. They didn't like this, they didn't like that, add this, take this away. And then I flew to Baltimore to their headquarters to go to their studio because it was going to be video. And the closer it got, I lost my freaking mind. So the chatter, which I'm calling the spiral, I think he probably said that, but for me, it's a spiral. So I went from, I mean, they knew me. I'd spoken for them before. They knew my style. But every time they asked me for a revision, my self talk got worse. And then when it was time to go, my panic got so bad, I wound up calling my doctor. I'm in Baltimore, and he called me in a prescription for not Zoloft, but some antidepressant that takes a month to work. And I was like, that is not going to help me. So they finally did call in a prescription for Klonopin, but Jamie lived in DC, which was an hour away or so. I don't know. And then Tim was here in Nashville, and they were both talking about did they need to come and get me because I was literally on the ledge in my mind. So that was the worst, other than the hospital stay. Now, fast forward, um, I mentioned this to you. We may have said it in the last podcast. So, y'all know I do webinars for an EAP program, and I'm on this webinar a few weeks ago, and I get a message when I get off from, so the webinar is for a client in a company, but then the EAP, they stay, they're the ones who set all this up. So I'm through with it, and one of my colleagues writes and says, "Oh my gosh, are you okay? What happened?" And I was like, "What?" Well, the whole time that I was on that webinar, the client was writing to my colleague, they didn't like me, for many, many reasons. So my tendency would be to spiral. But in fact, I did not because of many things. I mean, we've talked about medication before. Like my anxiety as of late was clinical. It wasn't just the occasional worry. It was, okay, it's time to revisit medication again. So that's why it was such an important book to me. Do you want to start talking about the tips, or what do you want to do? Because I've been
So I wanted to ask, like,
jabbering.
just kind of like for people listening, like back in 2015, because I think like talking through the tips from the perspective of, like, do you think like of these tips, like if you had had those in 2015, which of the tips do you think would have been
Um,
helpful, or do you think that like using the tips earlier on is key?
Wait, say that again. Wait.
So like, I guess like, do you feel like in 2015, using that example, do you think like once you're calling, you're asking, you're calling your physician, like, do you feel like the techniques would work then? Do you feel like someone needs to start using them prior to that point when the self-doubt first steps
That-
in?
That's a good question. I don't think they would have helped me at all in the moment in 2015, if that's what you're asking, because I was already too far.
So
Now,
beforehand, use them
weeks
beforehand.
beforehand, maybe,
Yeah.
like when things were first happening. But by the time I got to that hotel room, no. It was, my brain was just too far gone at that
Okay.
point. So I think it's a combination of things. And so I do want to make that clear. Like Michelle and I are never here to give you clinical advice. We're here to share experiences, and as far as the books go, what we took from them. So I will say, at this point in my life, it is holistic. Um, I don't know what my future will be as far as holistic mental health, if it'll be medication for a season, forever. I'm working with my practitioner, and we meet every once in a while. I have a counselor, but I need to transition and find somebody else. But there are several of these that have been very important to me. Do you want me to tell the ones that have helped me most,
Yes.
especially related to those two stories? The first one is a little bit of a combination. Number two, imagine advising a friend. And what has, I'm going to even add to that. So, what helped me so much this time is that my boss and friend, Gracie, who has been here on our podcast before, so she runs the whole training department, and she's a speaker, she's a trainer. And 6 months ago, I don't know how long, 3 months ago, she shared a story with me about presenting for a big, big company, and they hated her. And the way that she shared the story with me was they hated me. They thought I was too flippant. And she was like, well, I learned something from it. She said, I learned that I need to tell clients before I start that, listen, I do use humor to lighten the mood. So she's like, I learned something from it. She's like, I am who I am, but I learned something from it. And so I imagine Gracie like having done something like that and me giving her advice that she has given me before. That, so I put imagine advising a friend um, with number 6, which I think was very powerful, which is normalize the experience. So instead of just saying, um, you know, I'm anxious or, I'm, what am I going to do the next time around? I'm very anxious about this. Then I can say people, like people get anxious sometimes when they have an experience and then they had a bad experience and now they're having to do it again. So knowing that I am not alone has been huge for me. Like I'm not the only person in the world who has these types of responses, and that gives me some peace and comfort. I don't feel like, for lack of a better word, a freak. Like, I'm the only speaker in the whole world who ever gets upset, and that's just not true. So
Or
those
like, I mean,
are,
had someone like say like, what is this statistic? Is it like that is was it 15, 30%? I don't remember. Like the statistic that that many people, when you walk into a room, any person just will immediately not like you for whatever reason. Have you ever heard that statistic? I need to look it up and put in there. Someone probably
no.
made it up. But at any rate, like as someone who definitely has been like a people pleaser in my life, that was powerful to learn that like you can't please everyone.
No. We don't
There's
like it. I mean, we don't have to
mm,
be happy about it. But
but you will encounter people who, for whatever reason, yeah,
yeah, yeah, I
aren't a
hate these
fan.
people. No, I'm just
I
kidding.
will, yeah. I can't
Um,
believe. I mean, that just makes me mad that they said that.
which ones? About Gracie?
No, about the company, your client. That. Oh, yeah. Anyway,
Yeah, they didn't like me at all, but it's okay. All right. I mean, I have a couple more, but do you want to talk about any of them or else we can just read them in order? Those were the two. I mean, all of them, I could share stories about every single one of them, but I won't. But those two have been particularly helpful. And we would love, really and truly, we would love to hear your stories on, if you are a chatterer, a spiraler, um, tell us, which of these 12 that we're going to read through help you the most. But do you have any that you want to comment on?
I think that the normalizing has been really powerful for me. I think it is what has helped some of the times in the past, the negative self-talk. I think that just realizing that it's okay to be you, regardless of like what that means around you. Um, I
Hmm.
mean, that's powerful. Like I don't have to change for this or that to fit in here or there. That who I am is who I am. It's like that's I think the normalizing part that yeah, it's okay. The fact that Gracie's like, okay, somebody didn't like me. Like it's okay to have that experience and just to
Yeah.
move on with it. I think that's so powerful.
I think, and for everyone, we would never encourage you to share anything you're not comfortable with, but sharing your experience with other people and being a little bit vulnerable if you feel safe can be really helpful. I mean, in mental health first aid, we do teach, like, if you see someone suffering, maybe they're going through grief, probably the thing that you don't want to say is, oh, I know exactly what you're going through, because, you know, but letting people know that like, if you're suffering, if you're critical of yourself, and just if you can share your own experience, it allows that normalizing, allows people to feel less alone because it's not just them.
Yeah, and I also think that I mentioned before, like the talking to myself like I would a friend or family member has also been really powerful.
Yeah, because we don't usually talk to ourselves very kindly. Okay, well, let's go through. So, number one is to use distant self talk, which we talked about earlier. Michelle didn't love it, Tammy did. Just kidding. Um, Number two, we've already talked about imagine advising a friend. Number three was really good for me too, and that was broadening your perspective. So think about how the experience that you're worrying about compares with other events that you've endured and how did you get through that? And so that what happened the other, with this client, I did go back in my mind and I was like, oh, I remember when somebody gave me a bad review on SkillPath. Oh, there have been times and the world did not fall apart and it's
Mm.
going to be fine. Just whenever you want to jump in, I'll just keep talking. Number five, maybe I should do better at this, but reinterpret. Sorry. Number four, reframe your experience as a challenge. This is one of those that I was like, it's not that I had never thought about this before, but instead of just thinking of the situation negatively, so I'm going to go back to mine. I did look at it as okay, because one of the things this woman didn't like is that I was putting in an extra video because they get the PDF of the PowerPoint before, but I like to put some extra things in. And she was like, no, no. And so she was really upset about that. And so I was like, okay, going forward. So maybe as a challenge or what I've learned or, you know, tell the client before we start, I have a video. Are you okay if I share it? So
And that is, I think, definitely something that is also helpful with different types of anxiety. I think that can be helpful even with like social anxiety, like reframing, like, the feeling. Because social anxiety often is just a feeling, reframing the feeling of fear into this is an opportunity to meet lots of new people and make connections and
did you do
see,
that?
what I can learn. I have before, yeah. Like it was really, and it is helpful.
Now, I have to ask you a question because we
Yes.
just started season two of Shrinking, and I know you've been watching it. So my question is, can I can I take that as therapy? Shrinking.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm
Although they make many good points. There's also some, yeah, it's interesting.
There
The
are a
show.
lot of bad things, yeah, that they give. But there was a scene we were watching last night where Sean, one of the characters, has been asked to do an interview with a blogger, and he doesn't want to. He's a vet, and he was going through PTSD. But the woman who has gone into business with him wants him to do the interview, but he's afraid to tell her he doesn't want to do the interview. So Paul, his therapist, sorry, no, it wasn't Paul, it was Jimmy, told him this technique. Um, Maybe both of them did. Anyway, he did it and it worked. So I'm like, that seems like therapy to me. So anyway, it's reframing. It's reframing. Okay, so the answer is no. If you all are watching Shrinking, you cannot use that as therapy. All right, should we go on?
Yes.
Number five, this is the one that I don't always pay attention to. It says reinterpret your body's chatter response, like an upset stomach before you present, or sweaty palms, or dry mouth, or maybe your heart's racing, you're upset, pounding heartbeat. Um, I don't know that makes me, I think because of my panic attacks, maybe that's something I already do. Like I know it's going to be okay. So, coming from your point of view, do you think a lot of people kind of freak out about those bodily responses and it scares them?
I think sometimes it was a little difficult for me to understand what he meant by that, but
Yeah,
definitely I think sometimes like people interpret anxiety as a heart condition. However, like from a medical perspective, you always encourage people to,
check it out.
make sure, yeah, that that's not what it is. But I think that, yeah, so again, that one was a little bit harder, but at the same time, I think that I understand what he was saying in terms of like calming down the physiology aspect of things.
Yeah, I guess when I think about it in light of Michael, um, I haven't had a full blown can't breathe, hyperventilate, panic attack, probably since that time in 2015, but he has. And he doesn't mind if I talk about it, but it scares him. And so we do talk about, Michael, that's going to be okay, breathing and
Yeah. Yeah.
okay. Number 6, we talked about normalize your experience. Number 7 was another powerful one for me, engaging in mental time travel. Because those of us who do battle some anxiety, sometimes we can globalize and catastrophize, meaning, well, globalize mainly. Well, both of them. Globalize meaning I feel bad now and I'm always going to feel bad, or catastrophizing, which is kind of what chatter is, spiraling to the worst case scenario. And just that mental time travel also goes with a little bit with broadening your perspective, thinking of other things you've done. So I'm able to travel back and look at successful times, and I'm able to travel forward and try to vision myself having successful webinars. And so that's helpful. Number 8 is one we mentioned earlier about change the view. We said fly on a wall, didn't we? Maybe we didn't.
I don't think we have.
This one I haven't really tried. It's changed the view, but it's sort of adopting you're on the wall watching. And I think that was what they were doing in shrinking is watch yourself have that
Mhm.
conversation. So maybe I do. I don't know. I'm going to keep going unless you have. If I don't have something to say, I'm going to keep going.
Okay, keep going.
Number 9, write expressively. Not good at that at all. How about you?
I I think that has been something that has helped me in the past. I think that getting ideas down, saying things out loud has definitely helped stop some negative thought patterns.
I know you're right. I just don't do it. I mean, I'm just going to be honest. But all right, number 10, adopt the perspective of a neutral third party. So I look at this and changing the view and distant self-talk as being very similar. So it would be um, looking at through a neutral third party as if you had somebody there navigating for you.
I think that one can be helpful, and I think we do it some without realizing it when we can take someone's criticism or suggestions and look at it in the whole picture without taking it personal.
Oh, can people do that? Criticism is my least favorite thing in the world.
I mean, obviously, like no one loves it, but like when you say, okay, I'm going to look at this, I'm going to take it, and if I can get something positive from it, I will. And if I, whether I can or can't, I'm just going to let it go. That's kind of looking at it from that third person
That's
viewpoint.
true. That's true. And I think a good way, I hadn't thought about this till you said it, but like if someone is upset with me and says that I've done something wrong, even if it was Tim, there would have been years when we were first married where I still couldn't, I would get upset. If he said I did something wrong, then I would just be like, no, I didn't. But, that's interesting because I kind of adopt and I think you do too, hmm, let me think about that.
Hmm.
And then even taking it further, being able to accept responsibility and apologize.
Yeah.
Okay, and the last 2 are very different. Um, I'm going to say them together. Number 11 is clutch a lucky charm or embrace a superstition, and number 12 is perform a ritual. Did you have any thoughts about those? You're like making a face. If you're not watching on YouTube, she's like just sort of scrunching.
I think that like whatever it is that helps you, if those things help you. And the ritual part, I understand what he's talking about, like getting like where your brain is. We've talked about this several times on the podcast of the difference between when your mind is in fight or flight and when it's in more
Mhm.
logical thinking. And so I get that like having the ritual patterns like can be trying to move your mind out of fight or flight. So I get
Yeah,
that. I don't have anything like that that I can
that you can think
use
of.
as an example. I will say, like, and I don't have any Lucky Charms. It's almost like the Lucky Charms are kind of like the placebo effect type of thing. Like he talks about the placebo effect in the book, but I will say that certain things like when I am presenting, if I am anxious about it, I don't do it as much anymore, but like if I'm anxious about presenting, I will hold the penny in my hand. Like holding something in my hand
Mhm.
will absolutely steady and calm me. And again, I think, whether it's having like my hand, I'm not sure, but like that is one thing I can say I've noticed, but I don't know anything other than that. Having your baby teeth, I don't know. I don't know. Maybe that's a cultural thing. He talked
Oh,
about that in the book. I don't know.
well, and yeah, we'll talk about just a couple things about that, but even like my grandmother always said the rosary. So I
Mm,
grew up and is holding those beads. So he does say lucky charm or superstition, but depending on what your bent is, I mean, Michelle and I are both, Jesus Bible reading Christians. Um, and so I don't, but my grandmother always had those rosary beads. But I even think about things, and you can take this however you want to, right? Like having maybe even a weighted blanket where you wrap it and it touches you, or you have your dog that you're petting, you have a pillow it's just something that maybe if you're sitting at night and it's just comforting to you. So that's the
I've
way that
been on a flight before that was a little frightening. Like said the Serenity Prayer over and over, and that was helpful. It was very calming.
So that makes me think, like ritual. So the number 11 and 12, I think for people who are Christian people, you're like superstition, a
Right,
ritual.
right,
But we do them as Christians. We just don't call them that necessarily.
right. Yeah.
And so a ritual can be like mindfulness, meditation, prayer. Um, and oh, it wasn't in this book. Was it? It was the other book. So I read a book called Ritual. And oh, right. Yeah. So after I read this book, then I listened to another podcast, and I said I read this book, Ritual, but there are some tribes around the world who do some very different, very interesting death rituals. So never mind, that's a whole different things. But you may have things passed down ritualistic that you do because you've learned it growing up. So anything that, if it's a ritual, helps you. Um, just for calming that chatter. Remember, that's all we're talking about here is ways to block that negative cyclical self-talk that you just can't seem to bring yourself out of. And to Michelle's point, there are many times where you don't want to just squash an emotion, if it's grief or you want to work through it, but it's hard to do that if you're spiraling. So,
Yeah, yeah. The key to this book really is defining what chatter is.
yeah, I think so too. Oh my goodness. Do you think that we covered all the things we wanted to cover?
The only other thing I would want to say is that I loved the part where he talked about how green spaces, nature,
Yeah, that
how
was
that, yeah, can change so many things. It can change outlook, um, so many things. So that was powerful.
I thought that was one of the 12. Did we just miss it?
I think no, you said it. We just didn't get specific in terms of the green spaces and the nature. You mentioned environment.
And all the studies, which we won't go into, that he talked about with people living in a housing complex, those who had a view of green spaces and those who didn't. And um, so, yeah, spend time. Michelle knows. Like there's so many other things that we can do proactively to help, like Michelle exercises, and that helps her mental health. And, going outside, I walk Charlie outside every day, and I know I'm going to feel better when it's over. So a lot of these techniques are like in the moment, but of course, we always encourage you to overall take care of your mental and emotional well-being. Well, Michelle, let me see. I highlighted so many things. Let me see if I left anything off but I will put a link to Jill Bolt Taylor's book. Again, I thought it was amazing, but it may be deeper than I think it was. But it's great. What else did we say
It is amazing.
we were gonna put in there? I'll put a link to the ritual book in case y'all are interested. It really is, and I'll just tell you, one of the rituals is in a tribe. I don't remember where, but they don't bury their dead right away. You and I have talked about this.
We talked about it when we talked about From Here to the Great Unknown.
Did we talk about it on the podcast though, or just the two of us?
I think we mentioned just a little bit about how, like, culturally, maybe we didn't. I don't remember if it was mentioned at the podcast or not, but how Riley Keough talks about how, like, Western culture, that's not that's not really known in Western culture, but in Eastern culture, in certain cultures, that's very well known. And so we talked about it from that book.
Did we? Okay, I remember the whole part about in that book, but yeah, but the book ritual, if you, I think it'd be most helpful if you're trying to um, become closer to the people you work with. There's a lot in there about ways you can incorporate ritual to grow closer, but not death rituals. Anyway, okay, I'm going to stop talking about that now.
Hey.
Okay. So, all right. Well, we decided, so this was our last book one. In March, we have a plan. I don't know if we talked about that plan yet. It involves AI, but we'll talk more about that later, which means we'll have the rest of February. And you're going to pick a book?
I will. I will.
Okay.
I have a couple of thoughts. I'll look at those and see.
Okay. And we'll do that later so everybody has time to read it. But I think that will leave us with 2 episodes. And I think we want to do one on burnout and one on compassion fatigue. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. Perfect. Well, that's all I have. How about you?
Yeah, that is it.
Okay.
Definitely. I mean, definitely look at Chatter.
Yep. Check it out and then
Yes.
rate, review, download, leave us some comments, share. It's been a while since someone has left like an Apple review. It's been a few weeks or months, I don't know, but we would really love to have some of those reviews because it helps a lot. So, yeah, do all those things. We're probably going to do a little bit of a rebrand. I don't know if we mentioned this, but Michelle came back on with me. I think I said just for us to do a little bit, and we have 100% decided we're together again. So I think we said that last time. Okay, well, until we're with you next time, consider
Consider yourself
hugged.
hugged.
Bye.